Chapter 21. Palati Caesaris. 2 centurions approached their legate carrying miniguns and helped him dismount while our escort rode off. Mark and I dismounted and we entered the Palati. Inside, we were in a large room with portraits of Caesar and Joshua, in between large legion banners covering the walls. There were display cases with various tribal-looking artifacts, and even one with a King James Bible next to a Book of Mormon, under the main portrait of Joshua Graham. At the end of the room was a set of wooden double doors with 2 more centurions standing motionless on both sides. As we approached the doors, Joshua pulled us aside and said, "When you are before Caesar, drop to your left knee and make a fist with your right hand over your heart. Anyone in Caesar's lands is either one of his faithful servants or an enemy. Our Lord Caesar takes formalities very seriously." With that, the guards opened the doors, and we walked down a long red carpet toward a throne with Caesar at the end. I scanned the room quickly to see even more banners along the wall, and men in similar crimson outfits and black fur shawls, leather strap armor, and golden bull figures on the chests like Joshua's. Scanning the place, it looked like we were in an old pre-war courtroom. As we got closer, I managed to study this Caesar to notice he wore a similar outfit to the clones behind him but stood out by the dark gray wolf pelt, draped over his shoulders, and a gold-leaved crown thing atop his head. It looked like the guy was in his late 30s or early 40s. I assumed the infamous Caesar would be an old man or some mohawked and tattooed creep like many Raider kings, not a clean and collected man born only a decade or so before me. Despite the middle-aged guy's appearance at first glance, I could see stress and anger in those eyes. His dark gray hair had a few noted streaks of white and just barely started showing the signs of alopecia by its thinning state. We got closer and the warlord remained seated while staring intently at our every move. At the end of the red carpet and just before the steps to his throne, Mark and I simultaneously dropped to our knees and saluted Joshua's cue. Joshua stood with his fist over his heart and said to Caesar, "My lord, I have brought you the man I sent word of as well as our ally from Scottsdale." Caesar laughed. "Come now, Joshua, I haven't seen you in a month. Enough with the formalities and introduce me to these ambitious dissolutes." Joshua signaled for us to stand up, and we did while the dozen sentries watched us behind masked faces. Joshua said, "To my right is the Drifter who is working with Mr. Swilling's Arizona Resistance, and next to him is Marcus Dinero, Chief Ambassador for the city of Scottsdale." Looking at me with a penetrating gaze, Caesar asked in a strangely curious way, "So, you are with that group of miscreants that assaulted my garrison in Sedona?" I said aloud, but hoping not to anger this man, "Yes, my lord." He asked, "So my legate tells me that you are a potential asset in dealing with those resistance fighters. Is this true?" Every fiber of my being didn't want to answer that question in any way. I wasn't sure where the words I spoke came from, but somehow I uttered the words, "My lord, I am here in your court to offer whatever assistance I can to your legion." I almost instantly motioned to throw a hand over my mouth in disbelief at what I just said or agreed to. I didn't only out of instinct for what kind of message that would send. The graying Caesar stared at Mark but spoke to me. Why should I trust a man willing to betray his friends? I responded instantly, and again unconsciously, while briefly recalling Joshua's ultimatum. "Because I want to win." The dictator looked back at me with intrigue in his face and said calmly, "Explain yourself, and do answer honestly." Trying not to say something that would end with me getting nailed to a cross, I said, "I have personally seen your men at Sedona both during and after my part in the event. I have seen the resolve of your legion and know that no Phoenix resistance can stand in the way of your superiority." He stared at me menacingly for a moment afterward, while I tried to consider where my brain and mouth came up with the words I spoke. The autocrat broke the silence by letting out a great laugh in a way that showed he wasn't used to that. "Ha ha! I like that answer, Drifter." He followed immediately with an order that caught me off guard. "Tell you what, over the next few days, I will permit you to show your loyalty to me. Provided the resistance still trusts you after your task, you may be able to give me a piece of their plans. However, your immediate concern and primary new purpose in life is to prove yourself. So, I will tell you your task in a moment." I was wondering what the task was, but the warlord was done talking to me for the moment. Looking at Mr. Dinero, Caesar said, "As for you, Mr. Dinero, I understand that you have been keeping in touch with my legate here. Is that true?" I was again lost in my thoughts before hearing any more. My answer to simply avoid getting crucified just put me on a new and irreversible course. I was almost used to canceling my escape plans at this point in my life, and just stared into space while waiting to blindly answer another question. I shook myself out of it and observed the talk between my Scottsdale buddy and the dictator I just swore to aid. So Mark looked back at Caesar and responded by saying, "You betcha, Caesar. I am 100% for the Legion." Caesar looked skeptical. Why should I trust the chief ambassador of a city that holds pseudo-elegance and real greed over virtue, honor, and loyalty? Mark seemed to have his answer all prepared, but started by stupidly saying, "You see, Mr. Caesar." Angrily, Caesar shot in, "Just Caesar will suffice." Mark continued, "Yeah, sorry about that, Lord Caesar. I understand that your legion is coming. I do, I really do. And I hate that city of squatters and filth called Phoenix. So, as Scottsdale's chief ambassador, I have the ear of Master Walker and Mayor Sillin. Hell, I can steer them into just giving you the city if I play my cards right. Ha! But to answer your other question, I, like my friend here, realize that my city is doomed in the face of your legion. You see, I want to have a leg up and be in your good graces when your boys inevitably level the place." I felt that what Mark De Niro said was one of the stupidest reasons or ways to excuse oneself in the face of a dictator. He basically said that he only wanted to help Caesar in order to save himself. I knew that was his reason from our initial conversation, but I didn't think he'd say it to Caesar of Caesar's legion. So I was pretty sure that some legionaries were going to spring out of nowhere and haul Mark away. But Caesar felt different. Caesar studied him, remaining silent for a full, horribly uncomfortable minute. Caesar finally said in a matter-of-fact sort of way, "Your selfish and self-preservative nature may come to good use for me. After seeing your letters to my legate here, I would admire you having your loyalties to me rather than those wretched wastes of space who occupy Phoenix." That was it. Mark's position was solid as a rock, but the warlord was sure to add a warning. Rising from his throne and pointing at Mark, Caesar said, "You have just pledged your allegiance to me, Mr. De Niro. If you betray me, my agents in Scottsdale will kill you in your bed along with your assistant and 7 girlfriends." Mark replied, "No need, Caesar. I'm 100% your guy." "I hope so," said Caesar in a gruff way. Looking back at me, Caesar spoke, "As I said before, after working with the resistance, you will need to prove yourself to me. Although I admire your success and obedience to orders even from those who oppose me, I'd rather your obedience was to my orders and not theirs. I'm having my Praetorian Guard enroll you in the School of Leadership here in Flagstaff. You will be trained for 6 days and given the rank of Honorary Decanus. From there, you will take a contubernium to reinforce Centurion Talamon at the Havsu village. An incident happened there a couple of days ago, and I have ordered the battle to begin in 2 weeks. The battle there will be your test." Looking back at Mark, he added, "You are to head back to your city and keep doing your business as usual, but under the supervision of one of my frumentarii, Domini Platos. He will act as your new servant in the penthouse. He will keep in direct contact with me, and you will take orders from him regarding what I desire. He is my most junior frumentarius, but his loyalty has proven savage. Don't upset him, and you won't upset me." "Got it?" Mark said, "You got it, Caesar." One of the Praetorian guardsmen approached him and handed over a small golden medallion with Caesar's face on it. Caesar said, "You are to go alone. Domini Platos will be in Scottsdale awaiting your arrival." The Praetorian handed me one of the little medallions as well. As I studied it, Mark asked, "What's this for?" Caesar answered casually, "I'm trying out the use of these identification sigils for extraordinary individuals I need to deal with who aren't part of my legion. Don't think for a moment that you two are extraordinary individuals. This medallion is my mark and will guarantee your safe conduct through my lands. I haven't had a reason to give any of the dissolute one of my bestowments yet, so I guess we'll both see how this turns out." The two of us nodded, and the warlord looked at us. "You two have your tasks. Now go prove your allegiance to me." Joshua said, "Yes, Caesar. I will ensure they get to where they are needed." Leaving the palati and entering the courtyard, Mark seemed like he was in a much better mood and said to me, "So long. See you back in Scottsdale, buddy," and was escorted to his Pona, where he rode off back to Scottsdale far to the south. I, on the other hand, was dragged aside by a centurion with an Art Deco-style metal face mask. All the soldiers taking up the plaza were gone, and I marched with the centurion through the streets on my way to this leadership school. Chapter 22. Fide Sanguinis Usque in Sempiternum. When I asked the man where exactly we were going, all he said was, "Right this way, Decanus," in an emotionless but authoritative tone. We approached a large wire-enclosed compound with a sign that said, Schola Decanus. I assumed this was where I would learn how to be a decanus, whatever that meant. In the administration shack, a legionary in light armor and tribal face tattoos stood up from a desk and said, Ave Centurion, true to Caesar. The Centurion told the administrator person that I was an honorary decanus and that I was to be put in the 3rd phase unit. Just like that, a legionary in the corner of the room stood up and escorted me out the door and across the way to an armory. There, another soldier in a room lined with trunks and lockers gave me a red tunic, black leather kilt, black combat boots reinforced with metal shin guards, a bulky chest piece that looked like old football pads welded with steel plates and leather straps, a burlap sack, a brown leather backpack, black leather bracers, an old football-style helmet patched with steel and a familiar plume of red and black feathers coming out of it, a black bandana, 2 canteens, sleeping bag, and a pair of tinted goggles. Based on all the gear in my arms, I concluded those men leading patrols were decanuses. Decanae? The armory was also where I turned over everything I had on me, including some medicinal chems I had from a first aid box that Doc gave me. All my contraband was immediately placed in the trash, and once I had all my stuff, the Centurion came in behind motioning for me to follow. They put me in a barracks room with 7 other decanus trainees, and that was that. I had to talk to the other trainees that evening when they approached me like wolves eyeing a piece of meat. They looked ready to haze me or something, but backed off when the first words out of my mouth explained I was here under direct order from Caesar. I didn't do much talking with the other trainees that night, but doing so was intimidating. Some of them had been thrown into Legion soldier camps as kids or teens, and survived enough battles to be field promoted to recruit decanus. This school was where they would learn to be a prime decanus. Others were former warriors from dead tribes conscripted into the Legion and spilled enough blood in its name to be placed in this school. When they asked about me, I told them that I was an agent of Phoenix that is here to serve Caesar. None of them even knew where Phoenix was. All they told me after that was to be ready to go the next morning when the horn calls. I didn't want to be late for anything the Legion was in charge of, so I slept that night in all the gear the armorer gave me. After a few hours of uneasy sleep, the next morning officially started when the horn called. I sprinted out the door, putting my helmet on and face covering as I moved. Even though the others slept in only their garments, as soon as I left the door, they were right behind me. A veteran decanus stood by and we assembled in front of him while he shouted at us. When he asked who I was, I explained that I was the honorary decanus appointed to this training contubernium by Caesar. The veteran remembered and took out a golden paint marker to write Hundek across my chest piece. The sun just started to rise over Flagstaff, and our next order was to sprint around the yard in full gear, doing exercises in between laps. We filled up our water every hour, doing the same thing for almost 3 hours until the sun was overhead. Though I was already fairly fit from life in the wastes, I had never been more exhausted doing that much exercise in my life. Towards the end of that last hour, I collapsed to the ground. The veterans started shouting at me to get up, and the rest of the class started beating me with their fists or kicking me for what felt like forever. However, 2 minutes later, the trainees dragged me to my feet and shouted at me through their masks, "Keep moving!" At the end of our last lap, we formed in front of the veteran, and he shouted right in my face, "Caesar does not accept failure, decanus." The veteran pronounced Caesar like Kaiser, which I eventually learned was strangely the standard pronunciation throughout the Legion. From there, we split into groups of 2 in the yard while other training units did their drills and exercises. 2 dull machetes were tossed between the groups, and the veteran shouted, "Fight!" I was caught off guard, and the guy I was paired with smacked my helmet with the machete, creating a loud crack. I fought the guy in front of me the best I could. I had never fought with a machete before, so my adversary whacked me repeatedly, bruising my arms and sides and cracking the weaker parts of my armor in multiple places. I got a few good hits in, but these guys had been fighting with spears or machetes for years, thus making me no match for them. Dull machete or not, being exhausted and repeatedly getting battered by dull steel is a very painful feeling. Luckily, the horn blew soon enough, and our contubernium marched into the large wooden building at the west end of the facility for food. It was an average tribal meal served by slaves, but I was just happy to be sitting down without the threat of a beating. The meal consisted of maize, razor grain, and a cut of Brahmin meat. As I took the moment of rest to rub my heavily bruised appendages, the legionary across the table studied me. This was the first time I'd seen my comrades' faces since the previous evening. The guy looking at me was a dark-skinned tribal man with black face tattoos and a puzzled yet angry expression. He caught my eye and said brokenly, "You make it clear you're not warrior." Looking back down at my food, I said, "Yeah, I wasn't really expecting I'd be here." He said, "You learn to fight better or you die before you prove self to Kaisar." I said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm much better with a pistol or rifle. Never really fought anyone with a machete before," and shrugged. The legionary's face contorted to an even angrier one, but said almost sympathetically, "Guns are coward way of killing. Old machines die faster than blades." Looking at him, I said, "I guess you're right about that. With guns, you gotta worry about jams, rust, repairs, cleaning, and other shit." He grinned. "You see it right. You need to get better with blades. Lucky for you, we go to gun range next." I asked, "What about the machetes or spears? You said it yourself, guns are coward way of killing, right?" The legionary said, "Not all Kaisar enemies have honor, so guns fight guns, blades kill cowards." He saw my confused expression and searched his mind for better words. The guy clearly only started learning English recently. Every Decanus use guns first, blades second. Legionaries swarm enemies, Decanus kill from range. It clicked and I said, "Oh, I get it. It's a tactical move. A couple gunners per group can suppress from range so the legionaries can get in close to kill." First time I ever seen a legionary smile when he said, "Right. You see it right. Still, blades never fail when you need them, only dull. I beat you in fight." I show blade fighting trick back at hut. I smiled. "Okay, sounds good. It would be great to get some pointers back at the barracks." Just then our veteran came to our table and told us to move out. We marched with him out of the compound to a range down the street. The range was enclosed in between buildings with a bunch of steel targets situated in the ruins of a concrete structure downrange. Our veteran stood by and observed while the instructor showed us which weapons to use and a basic intro on how to operate them. We fired them, 4 of us at a time. We fired downrange first with 9mm pistols. I wasn't sure if I was hitting the targets, but the legionaries around me began to notice that I actually knew what I was doing. Most, if not all of these legionaries had never fired guns before and fought through battles carrying either a spear or machete. So, as the time at the gun range went on, it became clear that the instructor was only really interested in how the trainees handled the weapons as opposed to their true accuracy. The legionary in the mess hall was right in how guns came second for tribal warfare. The main purpose of gunners in a legion contubernium was to suppress the enemy so the swarm of blade wielders could get close enough to do their work. Next at the range were the 10mm submachine guns. Again, most of them didn't have any real idea what they were doing. Finally, we fired old 357 repeaters. I nailed my first couple of targets with the long lever actions. I was best with rifles or shotguns. After cycling through the firearms a few more times, I managed to confirm my theories on the Legion battle plan. It was clear that I had the most experience with firearms out of the whole group and took satisfaction in the thought that I was at least good at something. So we marched back to the school itself. During that march, and just as I started feeling good about myself, the veteran hit me with some words clearly and angrily backed by years of war and killing. "Get better with blades, Decanus. Guns will fail you when you need them most." Back at the school, we fought with blades for another hour, and I could tell I was getting better despite my bruised arms and legs. Then we headed into a large tent with a chalkboard at the end, and chairs set in rows before it, clearly some kind of classroom. Our veteran then began to go over tactics with us. The other trainees already had numerous experiences with it, but he covered the Legion's standard battle plan in great detail. There were a lot of individual roles for the different officers, and variations of the plan. Still, the standard assault basically involved swarming the enemy with conscripted cannon fodder and tribal auxiliaries. Then, a century or larger cohort would crush the enemy when they were good and tired with the Legion's elite forces, like highly trained veterans and even battle centurion units if necessary. So, half the class was tactics and basic squad contubernium leadership, and the other half was knowledge or even touch-ups on English. The knowledge lessons included the roles of the legionary, the necessity of slavery, why women are bad, why tribals are naturally evil, how assimilated tribes are saved by the Legion, how Kaisar is going to save the world, and why we all owe everything we have to Kaisar. In the end, our veteran said that my recitation of the Oath of the Legionary was on his schedule. I was stood up, brought to the front of the class, and repeated after the veteran. I am forever in debt to my Lord Caesar for saving me from my primitive tribal ways. I will serve him till my dying breath, for he is the one Mars sent to bring humanity back from the ashes of the old world. I will be the weapon of Caesar and destroy all his enemies, for his are my own. I will never surrender in battle and choose death before capture, no matter the circumstance. In the event I fail Caesar, I will die a shameful and humiliating death for my disloyalty to the son of Mars. I will be the devout servant and merciless warrior that Lord Caesar has trusted I be. Because of my servitude, I will live forever as part of the Golden Bull. Fide sanguinis usque in sempiternum. Loyalty in blood forever. Slit's hand. Chapter 23, Caesar's Task. The next 5 days were much like the first, and after getting a few tips in fighting by my fellow Decanus trainees, I felt very competent in my ability to kill with a machete. All my fellow trainees were officially given the title of Prime Decanus, as our veteran painted a red P on the side of each of their helmets. I, on the other hand, had a golden H painted on mine permanently. The armorer welded my armor back together. And when I left the admin building an hour later, I saw Caesar right in front of me, surrounded by his Praetorian guard. Without even thinking about it, I fell to my knee to salute him. I guess the classroom propaganda subconsciously worked on me because I removed my helmet and goggles and then shouted, "Ave, my lord." He let out a short laugh as his Praetorians remained emotionless. "Seems you have committed yourself to the school. Those men you trained with have spent years spilling blood and killing for me, over and over again. They earned their leadership roles through blood on the battlefield and sweat in the training pits. The school was where you sweat, but now I hope you're ready to fulfill your blood debt." I looked up. "Your wish is my command, my lord," he sternly said. "Then there is no time for you to waste. In the Polity Square, there is a sentry ready to depart for the tribal village of Dry Wells. One of their decanae was recently reassigned, and you are to fill his place. Once at the village, you will take your contubernium and a force of our tribal allies to Centurion Talamon at our outpost near Havsu. From there, you will report directly to Centurion Talamon and do everything he says. You will be watched, Decanus, so do not let me down. I'm sure you know this from the school, but your life depends on your success. Now stand up." I said, "Yes, my lord," and he walked down the street being escorted by the Praetorians. I headed down the street past the less frequent patrols and slave crowds of Eastern Flagstaff to arrive at the square where my new unit was formed up to march out. I stepped forward and was approached by another Decanus holding a footlocker who said, "Our legatus said for you to have this." Inside the locker was my shotgun, my ammo belt, and a brand new clean black machete in a brown leather sheath. I hooked the machete on my ammo belt, slung the shotgun over my shoulder, and joined the empty slot at the front of the formation. Almost instantly, the Centurion shouted the order and we started marching. Being in front of the moving block of humans gave me a great view. Directly beside the heavily armored Centurion was a man in a coyote skull helmet with a large Legion flag mounted to his back, which I found interesting. I never got my first Centurion's name, but tried to remember everything I learned in the school as we headed west out of Flagstaff and into the wasteland. Our march was slow, which gave me ample time to focus on the knowledge I got from the school. My state of mind at that time had almost zero regards for the weeks, months, and events prior to my brief Decanus training. I wanted to serve Caesar well. The village we were going to was along the Colorado River miles north of Havsu. We only stopped to camp in the late evening. We camped in the wastes where the trees of northern Arizona turned slowly into desert. As a Decanus, I was in charge of 8 legionaries and 2 slaves, both of whom were women. On the march, the slaves followed between the formation and carried our water and tent supplies on long beams of wood, while a team of legionary slave watchers roamed between. At the camp, the slaves started to set up the tent, and I decided to lend a helping hand. Some of the other legionaries and decanae stared at me, probably thinking how odd it was for a Decanus to actually help his slaves. Once everything was set up, we rolled our mats down and I had to make a patrol roster on an old pre-war notebook I got from the school. The slaves gave my legionaries water periodically, and I walked around to meet my troops. As I approached each of the faceless legionaries, they all said the same thing. Ave, Decanus, true to Caesar. It was hard to tell behind the masks, but I knew they thought it was weird that I wanted to know their names and personal details. Their last Decanus didn't care about them even in the slightest. which was understandable based on what I learned in school. However, they were all the same, with the exception of one. They were all tribals conscripted into the Legion and had a bunch of Legion propaganda shoved down their throats for months or years. The last guy was surprisingly a volunteer. The guy used to be a scavenger near Flagstaff before the Legion took over in 2256. But after surviving 5 months of Legion soldier school, he came out as a completely brainwashed legionary, only able to respond to questions with standard Legion-style phrases. I thought it was exciting how they did everything I said without any kind of question. However, it was a little hard to manage them because it was like they lacked any kind of initiative. If I told them what to do, they would do it. If not, they would sit in the tent and sharpen weapons or spar with each other. It felt like I was their collective brain, and I briefly wondered what would happen if I told them all to hold their breath. As for the slaves, they sat by very quietly, watching me and waiting for orders. Every hour or so, the slaves would walk around and offer the soldiers water. I noticed some of the other legionaries and officers beating their slaves for even the slightest mistakes, but I had no reason to do that to mine, so I left them be. At night, I was able to sleep, though uneasily, until dawn. Every hour on the hour, I would hear my legionaries rotating guard shifts where they would patrol along their designated routes between the tents. When morning came, everyone ate their rations quickly while the slaves rolled up the tents and we formed up to march out. The desert sun was high above, and I could feel sweat slowly covering my body. Wearing all that headgear sucked. My vision became slightly blurry because of the heat my face was giving off to my goggles, and the damn bandana didn't help at all. Wearing a complete face-covering headdress made breathing not necessarily difficult but irregular. I would get used to it eventually, but I was used to roaming the wastes with my head free to take in the fresh air. I did get a brief reason why every legionary wears a face covering in the school. It is taught that in the field, involuntary facial expressions could show fear or nervousness to the enemy, although I seriously doubted that any of these brainwashed legionaries would show any ounce of fear in the face of battle. The face coverings of an entire legionary battle group created a terrifying and faceless image to instill fear in the enemy and erase individuality from the unit. Also, the face covering helped in the event of dust storms across the desert. During the march, I noticed a legionary from another Contubernium patrolling in front of our centurion carrying a handled box that he waved back and forth, and had different antennas and cords that led to a slim box on his back. I thought he might be a radioman at first, but remembered that the Legion doesn't use that kind of technology regularly. I found out what he was when he waved at the centurion to halt the march. We then traveled off the crumbling road and into the desert. It was then that I realized that he was using a Geiger counter. Up in the distance, I saw a large mound of rocks and realized we were about to walk into a zone still irradiated from a tactical nuke. Atop the mound, I saw the tiny movement and shapes of sand scorpions attracted to the radiation. The scorpions left us alone after we changed our course. Hours later, we reached a part of the desert where the flat sea of sands turned into little valleys and ridges of sandstone and jagged rock. Along the ridges, we saw large tribal totems made of scrap metal, cacti, and animal bones that got more and more frequent the further west we traveled. As it got dark, the sentry made camp again, and I overheard the centurion talking to some of his guards saying that we were in Twisted Hares territory. The Twisted Hares were the tribe that lived in the village of Dry Wells where we were going. We must have been close to the Colorado River because the rocks around us showed signs of erosion from millions of years ago. The sentry set up camp when we reached the outskirts of their territory, and I figured we would reach their village sometime the next day. The night at the camp went by the same as the previous time, and in the morning we resumed our march through the mountainous region along the Colorado. When midday hit, we were marching along a dirt road with a large village in the distance. I had seen tribal villages before, but most were just tent encampments surrounding a long deserted pre-war structure. Dry Wells was a sprawling village with tents and post-war brick or adobe huts dotting the ravine or nestled in the cliffs. The village spread from the rocky passes all the way to an opening on the far west cliffs that led down to the Colorado. Our centurion ordered the march into town, and the smell of the river began to seep through my bandana. As the town itself got closer, I got a better look at the tribal totems and occasional Legion banners that dotted the cliffside. We reached the village center where we were ordered to set up camp around the big open area where the Twisted Hares conducted their tribal gatherings and ceremonies. Chapter 24. The Twisted Hair's Boy. I was overseeing my men and slaves when my centurion approached me. He said, "I have your task under the order of Kaisar. You are to stay the night here, then take your men and the Twisted Hair scouts down to Centurion Talamon in Havsu. An explorer has been assigned to your contubernium who will help guide you there. When the explorer greets you, you are to leave immediately." I said, "Yes, Centurion," and he walked away. Then I tended to my slaves and legionaries to see if they needed anything. Occasionally, tribal children would wander up and speak to me or one of the other legionaries around our encampment. I had no idea what they were saying because of their own tribal language, but suddenly noticed that they all had the same hairstyle. Each one of the tribals in this place, boys, girls, men, women, and elderly, had their hair braided into dreadlocks with different beads, feathers, and trinkets woven in. I guess that was why the people called themselves Twisted Hairs. After giving the group of children one of my bread rations, they would run away to go play or do some other activity. I was sitting by our campfire tending to my sore feet. All that marching was taking its toll on me. Looking into my tent, I told my legionaries and slaves to take the night off. After seeing the other legionaries wandering around and talking with the tribals or purchasing goods, I assumed they'd take the cue. My particular contubernium had no idea what that even meant, so they all responded in unison with Ave Decanus, true to Kaisar, and proceeded to sit there and drink water or sharpen their weapons. I wasn't a mindless servant of Kaisar with no ambition other than serving, so I got up to walk around. Walking around the village, I was just glad I didn't have to wear all that face covering, so I took in the fresh air. Around the village, I saw children playing, women doing their chores alongside the men, and warriors covered in tattoos training with spears, machetes, and tomahawks. I decided to head down to the river as I found myself more interested in tribal life. At the river, I took in the sights of the mighty Colorado River that I hadn't seen in a while. There were boats on the shore and tribals fishing, people doing laundry, women weaving baskets and such, and kids playing there too. Tribal life seemed completely innocent, and really something else compared to other civilized places I'd been. I thought back to years prior when I crossed the Colorado, left California, and landed in Arizona. I never thought in a million years that I would be entangled in a conflict with the Legion, Resistance, and people of Phoenix. Not even 2 months ago, I was just a nobody drifter who got into some trouble with preppers, and still felt that way in some regards. I concluded ignorantly, I'm still the same old guy, but I just happened to be running missions to prove myself to Kaisar while still committed to Swilling's resistance. As I looked out over the Colorado and all the people who went about their business, I noticed a boy in tribal garb just standing all alone by the river. Longing for some real human contact and hoping he spoke English, I approached. The kid stood there motionless and staring at the river or cliff beyond with his hair braided the same as everyone else. He looked African American and had a few tattoos on his back. The kid looked dazed and no older than probably 13 or 14-ish. I knew he heard my footsteps but remained still regardless. I stopped, stood right by the kid, and asked, "Speak English?" Turning to look at me, he said, "Mintu, little." I asked, "What's your name?" Confused, the boy said dryly, "I no name." I responded, that sucks. Trying to fish for your family or something?" He said, "Nek Maktanan, I no family. Only Twisted Hairs." Pausing, I said, "No family, huh? That sucks too. You know, I can actually relate to that. So what you doing out here then?" The kid looked straight forward but answered my question. "I look at wall." I was about to acknowledge this when he asked, "What is past river?" Looking at the giant cliff on the other end of the Colorado, I said, "I grew up past there. Nothing but people killing people, just like here in Arizona." He turned his head towards me, revealing a face of disbelief, and said, "You grew a neck, pa? Why Kaisar, man?" Smiling, I said to the kid, "I did long time ago. Grew up near a town in California called The Hub. It's nothing but a den of thieves. Probably completely overrun by NCR thuggery and shit now. Don't really know why I'm with the Legion, though. Haha. Guess I was dealt a bad hand." He said randomly, "Twisted Hairs help Kaisar. Kaisar save all desert." I let out a kind of laugh. "I don't know about that. Haha. I could be wrong, though. Honestly, I'm sorta new to their whole deal." He looked blankly at me. Then, staring out towards the river and feeling weirdly fatherly, I said, "You have to make your own way in the world, kid. I'm not really sure what's out there, but there has to be something greater than what the Legion has to offer. And better than Phoenix and all of them. He said, "What there? Who Phoenix?" I said, "I don't know. I'm already too involved in this crap to just be a simple drifter without trouble anymore. I kinda miss just roaming without a purpose, know what I'm saying?" "Of course you don't." I set my pack down and lay there in the warm sands. The kid sat beside me and asked, "Kaisar nice man?" I laughed. "No, not nice. Strong, though. Kinda seems like he had the makings of a good man, but people can do weird things when they get some power." The kid stared expressionless for a second, then asked, "You know family too?" I put my bandana over my face to block out the sun as I shut my eyes for a minute. I said, "Nah, lost them at around your age, trying to find a place to call home ever since." I could tell the kid was looking at me even though I couldn't see him. I felt the warm sun beating down on me and listened to the river current as I said, "I know what it's like to not have a family, but living in a tribe with no ma or pa has got to be tough in its own way." The kid mumbled with a hint of sadness, "Yes, ilnekwa pinamu home." Still relaxing with my face covered and the river steady, I said, "My advice, kid, if you don't feel like you belong, there's a whole world out there. Find a place to call home and place your flag in it." Metaphorically speaking, of course. It's really easy to have your home ripped from you in the blink of an eye, believe me. The kid mumbled something seemingly nonsensical. "I born in home is tribe." Not sure if I should acknowledge the kid's rambling, I said absently, "Tribe is a good home, but just because you're born there doesn't really mean it's home. My home was taken from me long ago, but a home is more of a place you, I don't know, breathe life into? Yeah. Home is a place that you make yours." I paused, thought for a second, and said aloud, "Sorta like my shack in the desert. The place was a patch of dirt before I built it up and made it a home. Not that any of that matters now." With that, I passed out for a few minutes exhausted from the past few days. When I opened my eyes, I saw the kid rummaging through my pack and taking out some of the pre-war magazines I kept in there. He noticed me awaken, but focused more on a magazine titled U.S. Army Ops. He asked, "What America?" I said, "That's where we live. It's a big mass of land that was bombed to hell a long time ago." He flipped the pages and read some of the articles. The kid looked fascinated reading the articles about U.S. soldiers fighting the Reds, studying the pages, and with no regard to them being mine, he ripped out little pictures of the old American flag and put them in his little bag. I didn't even care. This little tribal kid had probably never seen pre-war ruins or symbols of an old world that littered the wasteland. I guess it was something scavers like me took for granted. So I asked, "You want to keep those magazines?" Looking at me with a smile, he said, "I have books." I laughed. "Sure, haha, go ahead, take them." Completely randomly, he said. "When I stronger, I become Legion too." Concerned, I responded with, "Okay, if you want." Mumbling, I added, "Or if you have to." It was starting to get dark out, and I had to link up with my men for the march out the next morning. I told the kid who was still looking at the magazines, "All right, see ya. Good chat, kiddo." I walked away satisfied and thought about the little morale-boosting conversation. It was good talking to someone other than a slave who was scared of me, or my soldiers who mindlessly shouted Legion phrases. I spent the past week in soldier camp getting beaten and battered, then a few days constantly walking to the sound of heavy steps in unison. Finding innocence is hard, and I had another strange fatherly feeling that the nameless tribal boy would go on to do great things. Plus, it wasn't like any of that idle chit-chat with the nameless kid would stick with him. He barely even spoke English. Chapter 25. Preparing for War. Back at the tent, my men were still doing the same thing as when I left them, except some of them were sparring with thick wooden sticks instead of their blades. The slaves sat together on a log by the campfire watching me and awaiting an order. When I didn't order them around, they just sat there staring into the fire. When the flames started to die, one of them would get up and put more wood on it. Other than that, I was essentially alone in a place full of tribals and legionaries. Relaxing the night away, I overheard some of the other legionaries abusing their slaves physically and sexually in the other tents. My slaves looked at me worriedly, but I said dumbly, "Don't worry, I'm not like them," and gave a non-sarcastic wink. They then stared at me, still instinctively awaiting orders when I said, "You two are done for the night. Go to sleep and let me know if anyone gives you trouble." They stood up together, did a little bow, and went to their bedrolls in the middle of the tent. I steadily fell asleep next to the fire, and woke up at dawn with a legionary standing over me wearing a brown-wrapped hat with a sun visor. He said, "Ave Decanus. I am your explorer. We need to leave soon." I stood up, awoke everyone, and the slaves began disassembling the tent while my soldiers got ready to go. Supervising and assisting my men, I saw a group of Twisted Hair's tribals approaching. Each one of them wore a burlap and leather garb with belts of ammo and wooden plates fastened to their arms in vital spots of the body. Half of them carried hunting rifles, and the other half carried tomahawks or old fire axes. They all had one or two fleshy, rotting slabs of skin tied by hair to their garb. The explorer said that this band of warriors wear severed scalps when they are marching for battle. Kaisar was right. I would be there just in time for the Legion's assault on the Havasu tribe. I led the march with the explorer by my side, going south through the desert and mountainous terrain past the smoldering ruins of Bullhead City. There was me, the explorer, my 8 men, my 2 slaves, and 23 of the Twisted Hair Scouts. I didn't know what we were facing in Havasu, but I didn't think us alone could take out a village, let alone the entire Havasu tribe. I heard about the Havasu a long time before the events at Agua Caliente. Tribals were all across Arizona, but I heard the Havasu were huge, having hunting grounds for miles all around the western central Colorado. I just hoped that this Centurion Talaman, and whoever else Kaisar had in the area, had enough men to do the job without me having to kill myself for Kaisar. We only made camp once before we entered the battle zone on the following day. We packed up camp early in the morning before the sun even started to show and marched on. As the sun came over the mountains, I saw black smoke rising to the south. Marching on, we found Centurion Talaman's camp on a ridge overlooking the massive tribal and pre-war town of Havasu. The popping of gunshots was heard at the far end of the camp, indicated the fringe of the constant conflict. As we marched up the cliff, 2 legionaries approached with spears drawn. Afe, Decanus, Centurion Talaman wishes to speak to you at once. I gave them a brief acknowledgement and led my forces up the cliff to join the encampment overlooking the war-torn collection of Havasu villages. My men and the Twisted Hair's warriors began to join others in training exercises, while the slaves set up the tent. I approached the command tent decorated in banners spattered with blood. Walking past the sentry and opening the tent flap, I approached the Centurion looking over the command table. Centurion Talaman stood there as a monster of a man, decorated head to toe in steel plates with crimson inscriptions and golden bull emblems. Centurion Talaman was surrounded by several unmasked decanae that paled in comparison. The Centurion took off his large feathered helmet when he noticed me. I did the same and said, "Ave, Centurion, true to Kaisar," he said as the other unmasked man looked at me. "Av Decanus, have you brought the tribal scouts we requested?" I responded, "Yes, sir. 23 Twisted Hair's warriors are at your disposal, ready and willing to die for Lord Kaisar," he said. "Excellent. And as for your contubernium, are they prepared for the upcoming battle?" I said instinctively in my brief Legion brainwashed way, "Yes, Centurion. We are ready to destroy the Havasu savages at your command." Motioning for me to join the group, he said, "Good. You made it just in time. Our assault begins tomorrow morning. It's as if our Lord was awaiting your arrival to begin. Now come join me at the table so I can detail my century's role in the coming conflict." I joined the group looking over the command table, and he explained the plan to all of us. "We are the northern flank of the line, and our primus objective is pushing through the main line of tribals at the fringe village of Big Rock. Centurions Raylos and Signifer will storm the main line into Havasu proper and the southern border guards at London Pass respectively. They will act as the main force, but our explorers show a massive mobile force at Big Rock. Our objective is to carve the savages away to prevent any sort of bolstering of their main line." Centurion Talaman went on about the details for our individual contuberniae. When he covered my role in the assault, he paused, looked at me and said, "I am taking direct control of our auxiliary. This includes all the Twisted Hair's tribals you brought from the north." I responded simply with, "Yes, Centurion." He continued about our century's group objective at dawn. When the battle starts, once our horn sounds, all of you are to charge the disoriented savages and begin your butcher's work. It will be chaos in the killing pit. If any one of you, or your men begins to run from the town of Big Rock, you better be ready to die. Legate Graham is to arrive tomorrow with his veteran Centurion guard. Make Caesar and his legatus proud tomorrow or die trying. Once the tribals fall back to Havasu proper, the legate's guard will march forth and help shatter the remaining savages. You all have your orders. See to your men and ensure you are ready for tomorrow." We all shouted, "Ave, true to Kaisar," and began to file out of the tent. Centurion Talaman stopped me and standing next to him was another Decanus, Centurion Talamon, called Honorary Decanus. I stopped in my tracks and asked, "Yes, Centurion?" Pointing at the other Decanus, Talamon said, "This is Decanus Roblasius. You and him are to stay together during the battle. You two will fight alongside each other, and he will monitor your actions. You are still proving yourself and your allegiance to Caesar. Prime Decanus Roblasius is in the ring for veterancy and possibly Centurion pending the outcome of the battle. You are to do everything he says, as he is an extension of my authority. You two should get acquainted, that is all." I said, "Yes, Centurion," and walked out of the tent with Decanus Roblasius. His tent and men happened to be right next to where my slaves decided to set up, so I sat down by our campfire to cook up my rations with the silent Decanus. I studied him for a minute while he intently stared down my slaves with a strange look of seduction, rage, or intrigue on his face. He wore a nearly identical armor set to me, but had a P marked on the shoulder plates, showing he was in fact a prime Decanus. His hair was blonde, short on the sides and only a bit longer on top in old military style, greased over to the side, and his eyes were a light bluish green. He had scars all over his arms and some deep ones on his face that gave his emotionless expression extra character. He didn't really look like the other legionaries who were usually tanner, and typically had brown or black hair. Even the way he sat was seemingly bizarre. He sat leaning back on a log upright, but with his legs stretched straight out and wide, making his black leather kilt more revealing. The silent and out-of-place looking Decanus turned his head to me and asked suddenly with a foreign and wide smile, "So, what's your story, Honorary Decanus?" Giving air quotes around the words Honorary Decanus, I answered him plainly. I was offered an invitation to join the Legion from Josh, the legate, after some business in Phoenix. His grin grew a bit wider before he exclaimed, "Wow, you from there? Never had the pleasure of going myself." Looking into the fire, I said, "Originally, no. I just happened to be passing through when I got sucked into a complex situation. What about you? You don't look like most of the tribal legionaries I've seen." He smirked. "You have a sharp eye. That, or you just notice race more than I do." "You racist. Just kidding, haha." I was shocked by his joking demeanor. This guy didn't even talk anything like the other legionaries. The Decanus answered honestly without the sarcasm. "I grew up in a prepper town east of Flagstaff, and the Legion wiped us out when I was around 10 or so." He paused, but before I could say anything, he added, "Yeah, a few legionaries entered our trailer after killing my parents, and I stabbed 2 of them to death with my old switchblade. Their guys caught wind when their boys never came out and burnt the place down around me. As I came out coughing my lungs away, the legionaries bound me and placed me before the Centurion. That guy decided it would be a waste to kill a boy with so much blood potential, haha." I didn't know exactly what to say. I was just more surprised that this man didn't speak exclusively in Legion phrases. So I just asked, "What happened next?" He didn't skip a single beat before saying, "Next, they butchered all the women, little girls, elderly, and sick. Then they enslaved some of the men and boys for a trek to their soldier camp out by a place called Circle Junction to the northeast. I got out of that camp a few years later when I turned 15 and killed enough of the Legion's enemies to become a Decanus. Served as a recruit Decanus for a little bit until they shipped me to Flagstaff for more training, granted me prime, and put me under Centurion Talamon about a year back when I turned 18. I was honestly pretty shocked by his story, but even more so by the casual way in which he said it. During the short pause, I recalled all the stories I heard about the Legion from other resistance members like Sykes. The few people down south who had any interaction with the Legion spoke of the same things with tears and panic in their eyes as they remembered the things they saw happen to the people they loved. Not this guy, though. Decanus Roblasius talked about his family, friends, and neighbors getting butchered by the organization he now served with little emotion other than enthusiasm. It was in that moment that I strangely realized something. I disappeared from Swilling's band 2 weeks ago. Just as I had that thought, I caught Decanus Roblasius's curious look and followed with a question by asking, "What's it been like working under Centurion Talamon? Seems like a no-nonsense sort of man." He shrugged and responded, "It's been good for the most part. Several months back, and when I was new to his century, Caesar had us set up in Havasu. Our objective was boring, since it was to overlook the Havasu tribals while they helped us in our Sedona campaign. Ain't too wise to leave a foreign ally the keys to your house, while all your best warriors are out, if you ask me. But hey, that's tribals for you. Ha! He halted and then laughingly added, "It's actually sorta my fault that the battle is happening tomorrow, ha ha ha." I asked curiously, "How so?" He continued, "Well, a few weeks back we were supervising the day-to-day at Big Rock, and I got into a little scuffle with a tribal. I took matters into my own hands and gutted the tribal's family, while my contubernium held the rest of the village at bay. After crucifying the bitch on top of Big Rock itself, we held off the savages until Talamon managed to get us out of there." Looking out at Big Rock, the Decanus said, "When I got back here, a Frumentarius interviewed me about the situation and suggested that I be put in for Centurion or veterancy based on my men's performance. It ain't too easy holding off 200-plus tribals with only my 8 little lads. Centurion Talamon initially wanted me crucified for starting this mess. However, Caesar himself saw this as the perfect time to assimilate Havsu, given how Sedona was firmly under his control. Minus some incident that killed a bunch of our guys there." He stopped again, and then studied me briefly before concluding, "I guess he also wanted you to be here to prove yourself." I was a little astounded, and thought back to my own involvement in Sedona. I wasn't about to admit to killing this guy's comrades. So I said, "When I met with Caesar, he mentioned that something happened here setting off the siege. Never thought I'd meet the guy personally responsible." Then I gave a light chuckle. Upon hearing what I just said, he gave a sinister grin, but asked almost desperately, "Did Caesar have good things to say about me?" I studied the apparent desperation and pleading in his typically sadistic eyes and answered honestly, "Caesar didn't mention you by name. He just said, 'An incident happened there a couple days ago, and the battle will begin in 2 weeks.' That was it." The guy said with an obviously held-back hint of sadness, "Oh, okay. I always wanted to do something so great that our Lord would utter my name on his breath. That would be such an honor." I interrupted his longing gaze by asking, "So what does this whole thing mean for us?" He looked back at me and laughed. "I guess it means that if we win the day, you get in Caesar's good graces, and I become either a veteran Decanus or Centurion. If we lose, then that means we'll either die in battle or on a cross." "Ha ha!" He halted his maniacal laughter instantly and stood up saying, "Well, I gotta see to my men and slave cuties. I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Oh, and stick with me when the fight starts. I know you're pretty new to this lifestyle, but whatever you do, don't run away from the fight. Have a good night, Decanus, and give your slaves a kiss for me." The sociopathic Decanus then gave me an actual wink. I sat there thinking by the fire as the sky got darker. The next day could very well be my last. If I run towards the fight, I could possibly die. If I run away from it, I would most certainly die. My stomach was uneasy all through the night, even as I sat on my bedroll waiting. I envied the contubernium that was assigned to guard the camp and slaves, while the rest of us were going to charge into our possible deaths. I watched the legionaries patrol through the flickering campfires, heard the distant gunshots, saw the slaves all undergoing tasks, or heard slave abuse in the neighboring tents. I saw my slaves still sitting silently by the fire outside the tent, and suddenly realized why Decanus Roblasius was staring at them the way he was. Thinking about the next day, hearing abuse of slaves, and listening to the distant popping of gunshots, I wondered, what had I gotten myself into? But didn't even bother to plan an escape like I'd done in Mr. Dinero's penthouse. I then fell asleep. I awoke from uneasy sleep in the middle of the night to see both of my slaves sitting by me. I asked what they were doing, and they both just stared at me for a minute. I asked what they wanted, and they emotionlessly stated in a matter-of-fact sort of way that I was the best master they ever had. They even said they hoped I make it through tomorrow's battle. It really did warm my heart to be called their best master, and I was glad to make them feel safe over the past few days on the road. I really hadn't done anything, aside from not physically or sexually abusing them. I heard the slave propaganda in the Shola Decanus, but didn't buy most of it. Although, I'm not sure how I would have turned out if I grew up in a Legion soldier camp or something. After the slaves went off to bed again, I thought, if I'm going to be part of this organization, maybe I can be an example. Maybe I can steer it towards something a little more human. That idea seemed like a long shot as I continued hearing the abuse going on in other tents, or saw faceless soldiers hacking psychotically away at training dummies by the fires. All morals aside, I was still tired, and still couldn't stop thinking about the next day, my own safety, or the strange blonde-haired Decanus in charge of evaluating my loyalty and performance to Caesar. If I wasn't going to be killed in battle, I just hoped I was deemed good enough in the eyes of that sociopathic, devout murderer and possible predator Decanus Roblasius. Chapter 26. The Fall of Havasu. The Fall of Havasu. The light of morning started to show through my tent, and I barely got any legitimate sleep that night. I got up to put on all of my armor and made sure my shotgun was loaded. Putting on my helmet, I heard the sound of gunfire intensify while I watched the rest of the sentry prepare for battle. Centurion Talamon stepped out of the command tent with his helmet on and approached the muster while holding a strange spear-looking thing. It was a long metallic post with several switches and knobs around the handles, with a small spark coming out of the tip. I wondered what the weapon was, then I recognized it. Centurion Talamon was going to wield one of those thermal lances used in pre-war times for melting steel as a weapon. I guess that also explained the oxygen tank in the center of the grips. Those things use super-pressurized oxygen to cut through thick steel by incineration. Needless to say, I would hate to be on the receiving end of that thing. It was nearing that time, and Decanus Roblasius approached me helmet in hand asking, "You ready?" I nodded yes, and followed him with my legionaries to the staging area where the rest of our forces were gathering. I noticed the Twisted Hair scouts leave the staging area and charge off towards another ridge overlooking Big Rock. Gunfire soon erupted and kicked up sands around our forces still trickling down the cliff to join us. I took another moment to survey the surrounding ravine and the large force of black and crimson masked troops ready to move. Standing with the other officers, or decanae, I noticed 3 more legionaries standing away from the crowd wearing coyote skull helmets with the Legion banner mounted on their backs. Roblasius caught me eyeing the flag bearers through my goggles and lifted his bandana saying, "If you get separated or after we've broken through, rally with one of those guys carrying the flag. They're called a vexillarius." With that, a horn sounded and we all formed up. Roblasius said one last thing, "Remember to stay with me," and the second horn sounded. I was briefed on the plan but had no experience in a Legion assault, so I simply followed the lead of one of the forward decani, and we charged over the rocks and through the brush. Over the rocks, we were faced with flat desert, where our troops fanned out, staying with their leaders. We sprinted through the no-man's land, and then gunfire began to fall on us from up ahead. Several legionaries dropped to the sands, and a few dozen tribals sprinted towards us from behind their lines. As the tribals got closer, we shouted into the wind, burying the roar of gunfire through the muffles of masks. I halted, aimed my shotgun ahead, and fired 3 times before my men passed me to clash with the tribals. Joining them, I drew my machete and began carving tribals to pieces in a blood rage I never knew I had. The tribals screamed for mercy as the legionaries to my left and right severed limbs or cut throats in a display of total carnage. I took a free moment in the heat of battle to notice several glints of scopes up on the ridge behind us. Our Twisted Hair's auxiliary was picking off the Havasu gunmen, and their other warriors sprinted down the rocks to join us with axes drawn. Covered in the blood of the Havasu, I charged through the ranks of my men and tackled one of the Havasu gunmen. I slammed my machete into his neck and shoulders while the legionaries poured themselves upon the rest. I hacked away at the tribal on the hot desert sand until my goggles were so fogged I couldn't see the soul's face anymore. Hearing Roblasius's distinguished voice, he shouted over the chaos at me, "Let's go, we're pushing up." Ripping off my goggles, I moved with the legionaries towards Big Rock, where the tribals were evacuating to the main village in the pre-war Havasu ruins. Roblasius led me to a ridge where I saw waves of crimson pour over the landscape, burning everything in sight. The centuries of Signifer and Raylos broke through their lines and were beginning to torch the outlying settlements or forward encampments. The other armed legionaries and decanae joined Roblasius and me on the ridge to begin firing on the train of evacuating Big Rock tribals. Blinded by red, I loaded slugs into my shotgun and rained death upon those fleeing. Although there was something in the back of my mind telling me to aim too low or too high. At the moment, I couldn't even remember what I did. Perhaps my training from the past 2 weeks made me aim true, but part of me hoped enough of my conscience was intact to miss all those shots I fired on those running away. The howl of our guns continued until the refugees were far out of range. We halted fire, and there we saw a trail of corpses leading from Big Rock to Havasu itself. When the gun smoke cleared, I turned around to see the tribal village of Big Rock cloaked in flame. Our men marched toward the road to Havasu following a vexillarius out of the thick black smoke. One of the Vexillarius legionaries ordered a halt just before us, and Centurion Talamon marched up being escorted by his veteran troops and tribal auxiliaries. Looking at us on the ridge, Centurion Talamon said, "Fall into formation, ad victoriam." We joined the ranks and marched slowly towards the ruins of Havsu proper, stepping over the dead who dotted the trail. Then, I saw the Twisted Hares scouts charge past us to fix another position closer to Havsu. We marched on through the desert, and then through the ruins of the old town where we met up with the rest of the Legion forces. Past London Pass, and on the tribal-occupied side of the divide, we dispersed to join the other legionaries. The sun soon vanished behind the smoke, and clouds rolled in from the west to blanket the hot sands in a gray tint. There were over 250 legionaries all collecting their breaths and tending to wounds. 1 block away, we were facing over 1,000 tribals, and about 1/3 of them were said to be warrior-age males. Centurion Talamon met with the other officers, and I counted my men next to Reblasius, who was chugging water through a hole he made in his bandana. I only lost 1 man whose name I sadly forgotten, if he even had a name, while Decanus Reblasius lost 3. Reblasius was wrapping his arm up from a tomahawk-sustained wound and said, "You're doing great, Decanus. We're looking at a wave assault next to finish them off. Based on that giant group of tribals over there, we're probably going to be the second wave." He motioned towards a group of 50 or more tribals all armed with melee weapons, and a minute later Centurion Talamon's voice thundered from atop a rubble pile. "Auxilia, march!" The horde of our tribal allies began to march forward, being escorted by a single Decanus, and then they started to sprint into the ruins. Soon enough, we began to hear the shouting, gunshots, and clashing steel of battle. A horn boomed throughout the ruins, and Reblasius got up saying, "Come on, we're next." My heart still raced as over 150 of us formed up and awaited the second horn. The horn sounded, and every single crimson-clad and masked soldier shouted, "True to Caesar!" I charged with my men over the rubble and ruins of the old world town and past many burning huts or desecrated tribal totems. Soon, we saw our tribal auxiliary survivors of the first wave engaged in a brutal fight with the Havsu's last warriors. Joining in another fight over the crackle of continuous gunfire, we began our annihilation. My machete was starting to dull from the constant hacking, but I made use of what was left of my shotgun shells to blow apart some of them. Through the carnage, I noticed some of the legionaries picking up sidearms or rifles from the dead Havsu warriors and begin using them for themselves. We lost many legionaries in the first few minutes of the attack, and as soon as the thought of being overwhelmed entered my mind, the third wave hit. 50 more heavily armed Legion veterans stormed through the battle zone and continued the slaughter. This tipped the scale heavily in our favor, and our exhaustion was thrown out the window by an enormous boost in morale and carnage-fueled adrenaline. The Havsu began to fall back, and I saw one of the blood-covered veterans with a mohawk of red feathers along his helmet, pointing a dripping machete towards the river. The legionary's voice pierced the noise of the thinning war zone. "Meet them at the Colorado." Everyone charged forth, following the several Vexillari who led the way. Entering the Havsu tribal town, legionaries began to fan out and torch the place almost robotically. This massive horde of legionaries clearly knew what to do, likely having done this to many of Caesar's enemies before. The slower tribals still in town fled left and right, or made the mistake of helping the wounded, but the bulk of the tribe were already over the ridge and down the clearing to the river. With the town up in flames, we marched forth again to capture the rest of the Havsu by the banks of the Colorado. The entire force stopped on another ridge, and I stood with Reblasius to take in the scene. Several hundred tribals gathered around the river trying to board a flotilla of pre-war boats. Gathering on the edge of town and preparing to march down on them, a spree of gunfire came from the boats, killing dozens of legionaries all around me and clipping my arm. I fell from the pain in my arm and crawled back a few feet to the legs of Centurion Talamon, who stood over me, and the other dead, wounded, or sheltering legionaries. He shouted over me in frustration while the rest of the force continued to scramble for cover. "Shit!" He looked down at me, trying to halt the bleeding of my injury, and shouted, "Get up and regroup with the rest of our men in town. Centurion Raylos has a way of dealing with them." I gave a nod and winded acknowledgement to my commander. Then I stood up and wandered back to the rest of our forces in the burning village. I was now only down to 4 of my men. I sat by some of the other legionaries treating their wounds and began to assess my own. The pain of getting shot in the arm was intense, and there was little I could do. but I wrapped it up good and tied it off to stop the blood. Luckily, the bullet didn't hit any arteries, so it just took a tiny chunk out of my bicep. I wished I had some drugs like Psycho or Med-X to numb the pain, but the Legion took that stuff from me when I entered the school in Flagstaff. Roblasius approached and took a seat next to me, saying, "Great work, Decanus. I knew you had it in you. We just have to scorch the rest of the town and detain all the tribals now." I asked about the rest of the tribe in the boat fortress. All he said was what I already knew. I heard that Centurion Raylos is going to have his boys take care of it. I sat there for a while with my men and Decanus Roblasius watching the town burn. There was something oddly tranquil about watching that much smoke and fire be created if you didn't think about those flaming places as homes for families, worship buildings, etc. Decanus Roblasius was nice enough to give me some of his healing powder. That stuff tasted terrible, and snorting it made my mind get all muddled. On the upside, the pain in my arm was gone, and I eventually felt the herbal powder moving through my blood vessels to the site of my injury. It was then that I took in the human part of the scene. The few tribals that we captured were already being tied up and awaiting assessment by the Centurions. About 30 minutes passed before I saw 4 slaves carrying 2 large green boxes marked U.S. Army. When they set the boxes down, several veterans took out missile launchers and stuffed projectiles into loose-fitting leather satchels. When they marched off, it wasn't long before we heard loud explosions coming from the river. Roblasius and I got up and approached with our remaining men as the other 200 remaining legionaries continued sacking the place. Looking over the wreckage, only 2 of the 30 boats were destroyed. The rest of the rocket craters scattered the frenzied Havasu crowd. More legionaries approached the scene with us and began to march down to the river while the veterans sprinted forth. The Havasu warriors held up white cloths, not wanting to see any more of their people get ripped apart by missiles. There, the veterans escorted the warriors off of the boats at gun or spear point. Our forces took a good beating, but we actually won. The sky was getting darker, and the fires from the region glowed steadily brighter. I assisted in marching the hundreds of tribals back to the village where they would all be either discarded or assimilated. We tore down tribal totems, burned sacred artifacts, collected food stores, slaughtered the livestock, and piled the corpses of man and beast alike. All the slaves from the different camps soon joined us at the center of town, being escorted by the forces who got to stay behind. The current Legion slaves were then escorted by legionaries out to battle sites where they hauled back the equipment and bodies of our fallen forces as well as the Havasus. Both types of bodies were burned, but in separate fires. What happened next was what I'd only heard stories about. The legionaries and slaves made wire pens where we segregated the tribals by age, gender, and health. Tribal leaders or officials were set aside while crosses were made from the wreckage. Healthy warriors were split into groups. Male warriors began getting beaten and thrashed, while female warriors were taken aside for execution, due to their seeming incompatibility with docile slave life. Healthy women were given a red X on their chest and back, just like my slaves as a slave master, with tools began immediately showing them who was in charge. Anything perceived as weapons was confiscated, and personal items were burned in a bonfire. Young boys were assessed by the Centurions in strength and put in either the soldier group or sick group. Fit and healthy young boys in the soldier group were prepared for a march to an undisclosed soldier camp and beaten all the while. The elderly and/or sick group were taken in groups of 6 or 7 and executed in mass graves by the veterans in full view of the slave pens. However, some of the elderly were set aside for their purpose as healers and given red X's. The little girls were marked with red X's or sent to the sick and elderly pen based entirely on their perceived health. Healthy little girls were then assessed on their beauty, and very few were selected for elite servitude, which I later learned to mean they'd be adopted daughters for centurions or breeders when they came of age. The group of healthy women stopped getting beaten by the slave master and then had Centurion Talaman assess their own beauty. Centurion Talaman eventually rated 17 out of the nearly 200 healthy women as beautiful enough for breeding, and the rest were set aside for a life of manual slave labor to Legion units, mines, farms, ranches, or general workers. Just as the story went, that was what I saw. Anyone that could be useful to the Legion was used, and the rest discarded. I watched the scene initially with curiosity, but as it went on, that changed. My short time in the Decanus school made me view the aftermath of Havasu in a way I never would have thought. Everything the members of Swilling's resistance told me about the Legion was confirmed by what I was seeing. but it didn't have the profound effect I always imagined. I am not going to say that what the Legion does to the conquered is good by any means, but I did understand it in those moments. Caesar's Legion is a 100% war tribe. They deal in slaves and death. So, as horrible as the aftermath of Havasu was, I was able to formally understand the bitter, cold, and calculated logic behind the Havasu's annihilation with my morals and conscience removed from the equation. As it went on, I was authorized to sleep. However, I couldn't sleep and watched the whole thing go on as more of my conscience trickled back into me. The process of assimilation continued through the night and into the morning. They didn't want me doing any of the assessing because of my status as honorary, but I watched Roblesius gladly assist in nailing up the tribal leaders or lesser warriors selected for crucifixion. The night echoed with the crackling of fire, weeping of tribals, occasional screams of those foolish enough to try escaping, and the smell of the burning dead. Finally, exhaustion got the better of me, and I managed to fall asleep, still grappling with my role in the ordeal. Chapter 27. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted any of this. When dawn came, Decanus Roblesius poked his head through my tense flap with a big smile on his face, clasped the thing open, and popped a squat next to me, saying in his non-Legion-esque way, "Guess who just made veteran Decanus?" I rubbed my eyes and answered wearily, "You? Why didn't you get Centurion or whatever?" He said, "Not really sure, but I don't care. Really, I'm just glad I get to live another day and do my part for Caesar." Pointing up at a tiny figure on top of Big Rock, he shouted, "I told you I would burn your whole tribe to the ground." "Ha ha!" I asked, "Who you talking to?" He shrugged. "Oh, just that tribal bitch I mentioned. Tribal fuck got to watch her whole village fall apart. Provided she managed to stay alive the past couple of weeks on that cross. Ha ha." After a night of sleep and contemplation on what I did the day prior, I almost shouted at my assessor. Decanus Roblesius's face turned to confusion as I said, "You nailed a tribal girl up on a cross? You didn't say that the tribal you tortured was a girl." He said calmly, "I did tell you I nailed up a tribal bitch, also." He paused briefly before saying, "There's an old saying my inbred prepper father used to tell me. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. That bitch definitely won a stupid fucking prize for fucking with me." My conscience was now fully intact. Frustrated by his utter lack of emotion or human empathy, I scolded the brainwashed servant of Caesar. "You aren't even a little down about nailing people to crosses, executing the sick and elderly, and determining which women are eligible for raping." His mind registered what I said for a moment, and his face twisted from semi-satisfied confusion into a stunning look of pure and concentrated hate. Though his face showed devilish rage at my blasphemy, he said in a calm but scolding way, "If it is what Caesar wants, then no, I don't have a problem with it at all. And since you just proved yourself to be a loyal servant of Caesar, I advise you never to say or let alone think that shit again. Decanus. You're in the Legion now, boy. This is fucking war. So you better wise up and get used to it or end up like that bitch who crossed my authority." I grappled with my emotions for a second. Then I shocked myself by adding a genuine apology for my position on the tiny issues of organized rape, slavery, and murder. "Sorry, I guess the battle really threw me out of my funk." He looked puzzled as his face returned to normalcy from rage. "I don't know what that means, but I will believe your status as honorary Decanus means you are still adapting to the Legion. So I will forgive you." I again threw out all my principles and morals by saying, "Yeah, sorry again for my outburst." But before he could say anything, I changed the subject by asking, "You hear if Centurion Talamon needs anything from me?" His face returned to satisfaction. "Yes, I am to bring you to him. Pack your things and get up." Packing up my gear, I walked with Decanus Roblesius through the slave roundup that was still going strong, and into the newly set up command tent. Inside, I saw Centurion Talamon and a strange-looking wastelander in the corner facing away from us. I greeted the Centurion with a salute and the standard. "Ave, Centurion, true to Caesar." Talamon said, "Ave, Decanus, you have done me proud, but more importantly, you have done Caesar and his legate proud." I asked, "If I may ask, wasn't the legate supposed to be here for the battle? I thought you gave mention of the legate and his Centurion guard." Just then, the man in the corner turned around. It was Joshua Graham. He was no longer wearing the crimson and black fur-fringed uniform with the golden bull emblem that I saw him in during that meeting where I learned his true name and allegiance. Instead, the man I stood before was wearing ripped rodeo jeans, tan snakeskin boots, a white long shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and a black pre-war tactical vest marked SLCPD and SWAT in big white letters. I instantly dropped to my knee and saluted, saying, "Ave legatus." "True to," he interrupted. "It seems you have come a long way since our first true meeting at the I-17 gas station. Hard to believe that was only a little over 2 weeks ago. Stand up, Drifter." Standing up, I said, "What are your commands, Legate?" He smiled innocently. "You can stop talking like that for one. I cannot have you approaching your resistance brethren with the demeanor of a common legionary." I said in a blunt and semi-sarcastic way, "What can I do for you, Josh?" Smirking, he said, "Much better. You have proven to yourself and to the Legion that you are a capable soldier in the field and undercover. By embodying the everyday legionary, you not only showed your loyalty, but your formidability. Due to the situation we are currently facing, we cannot spare the time to train you for your next assignment. However, your actions for us, and for those who oppose us, have proven unique and more valuable than you likely realize. From here on out, I am granting you the title of Frumentarius, Agent of Caesar." I said, "Thank you, Joshua. What would you have me do?" "You are to stay within the ranks of Jack Swilling's Arizona Resistance and keep in regular contact with Marcus De Niro of Scottsdale. He will give you orders that are directly from me. You will likely need to prove your allegiance to Swilling's Resistance after your absence, so I am granting you exclusively the permission to kill legionaries. This is only if it benefits your goal of relaying information to us and staying in our enemy's good graces. Do not abuse this privilege, for we will find out who you kill and the circumstances surrounding it. I will tell you right now, although this doesn't seem to apply to your nature, you must not kill any courier you meet out there in the wastes. Many couriers traveling throughout Arizona and beyond are Legion agents and members of the Frumentarii." I said, "Sounds good, Legate, Ear Joshua." He nodded and said, "Before you depart, are there any questions on your mind? I will answer them to the best of my ability if it means you can better understand what I require." I was glad he offered a chance for questions, even though I had to think for a moment. I learned a lot about the Legion in the Decana School, but there were some questions on my mind that only the Legate or Caesar himself could answer. He told me why he admired me in the beginning, and saving his life only solidified our meeting. In the school, I learned all about why the Legion does what they do. But my involvement with the Resistance and their side of things made me ask the simple question of, does Caesar really have plans to march on Phoenix soon? His face remained steady, but another slight grin appeared as he answered, "Why? You want something to report to Swilling's Resistance?" I immediately shot back, "No, of course not, Lega or Joshua. Just somewhat curious about when I can expect to report back to you personally." His grin widened for a minute, before reverting back to its default emotionless state. "You need not worry about when you'll see me again. Mr. De Niro or his assistant will be your source of information, but I'll clarify that later. Also, yes, Caesar does have plans to take Phoenix in the future. Anything else? I have one more real question. Why?" I asked Joshua Graham, "Why does the Legion even want Phoenix?" He seemed somewhat surprised by that question. I guessed it wasn't too often that one of his subordinates asked for the reasons behind a given task or planned battle. However, he responded normally, "Caesar sees Phoenix as our Legion's own Carthage, even though the ancient timelines differ greatly between the rise of Caesar and the Punic Wars." He caught my unknowing expression and continued plainly, "Phoenix is the only civilized city 100 miles from anywhere in the Sonoran Wastes, and its water makes it a commercial hub that grows and grows off trade. Despite the squatters and junkies, the Phoenix government and its organization make it the most dangerous obstacle in Arizona to our expansion southward." I asked, "So Caesar wants to take Phoenix to control the trade and water?" He let out a tiny chuckle as he said, "No, not at all. Caesar wants the city annihilated." I shot in, "Wait, why?" He answered emotionlessly, "As I said, because an organized Phoenix stands in the way of our southern campaign, and they have the power to unite even the tiniest settlements in a joint effort against us if they choose. Though they have stayed predominantly mired in their own local affairs since its founding, I doubt that will stay the case when we move southward. Bypassing Phoenix cannot happen if there is even the slightest chance that they will hinder our move across Arizona. Phoenix will be destroyed because it simply must be done. That's all I will say on the matter for now, but your friend, Mr. De Niro, already has something in the works. Our plans will be revealed soon enough. But is there anything else? I thought for a good long minute to notice that Centurion Talamon and Decanus Roblasius had left during our chat. I concluded by saying, "No, I don't have anything else." He nodded. "We shall proceed with your current task then." I nodded in return and he went on. "You are relieved of combat duty effective immediately. Change your clothes and re-enter Phoenix. Phoenix will not let you in if you bear any sort of resemblance to us, but I'm sure you know that already. Mr. Kekos will relay information to you when Mr. De Niro is not available. Do not worry about finding them, for they will approach you when necessary. Simply continue your work with the Resistance and you will be contacted. Finally, our inevitable march on Phoenix may happen sooner than you think. When the time comes for you to rejoin our ranks, you will know. Until then, I bid you valet." With Joshua's new task, my role in the fall of Hafsu, and my ties with Jack Swilling's Resistance, I was more involved in the conflicts of Arizona than I ever wanted or expected to be. Chapter 28. One Head and a White Lie. I managed to find a tattered rag outfit on the remains of dead tribals, a good pair of boots, and a decent pair of jeans in the mess. I threw on my pack and loaded it full of gear for the walk back to Phoenix. On my way out of the scorched ruins of the once grand tribe of Hafsu, I found some dead legionaries who had been killed in the first wave that the corpse retrieval teams missed. I thought that I had to come back to Phoenix with some kind of proof that I was still on the Resistance's side. I thought it over for a few minutes. Then, I begrudgingly cut the head off of a sun-baked legionary. I stuffed the head into my pack once the last of the blood poured onto the sand, and I wrapped it in the rags of 2 red tunics. I moved my food rations, fire starters, and essentials into my leather satchel in order to avoid contamination by the wrapped head. I was going to tie the hair of the fallen legionary to the straps on my pack, but the dead men were shaved-headed. Doing what I did was unbearably disgusting, but the dead legionary's head I acquired definitely looked the part and would hopefully prove something if needed. I then picked through more legionary pockets for little trophies. I walked on until the village was just a faint smoke cloud in the distance. Every now and then, I would encounter a patrol of legionaries, and they'd stop me. I told them that I was one of the Frumentarii, and I greeted them in the name of Caesar. They would apologize and let me go. But I occasionally had to show them the mark of Caesar that I was sure to put back in my bag underneath the head. Western Arizona was on the frontier of Legion territory, so the patrols became much less frequent. Upon leaving the territory, the wasteland became much more dangerous. Surviving for years in the wastes got me pretty good at avoiding the roving packs of sand scorpions, Gila beasts, and the occasional deathclaw. Even when I started to encounter more people as I got closer to the civilized valley, they were generally packs of raiders or preppers. Occasionally, I did come across a super mutant raiding group. There weren't too many super mutants in the Arizona wastes. I remember growing up back in California and hearing stories about a vault dweller who saved the world from an army of super mutants about 70 or so years before I was born, but they were just stories. There were still plenty of the big green and armed humanoids back in California, but they supposedly wandered in groups and stayed in the wild lands north of NCR territory. Simple travel advice said that as long as you were with an armed group, you were generally okay. It was also said that after they were destroyed all those years ago, many wandered east never to be seen again. Shortly after settling in Arizona, I learned that some of them ended up in the Sonoran wastes and stuck around to make small fortresses dotting the wasteland, where they sought revenge on the human race who destroyed their supposed master. After about 3 days, I saw Luke AFB in the distance, signifying the western edge of the civilized valley. I encountered a few patrols of the old soldiers that still inhabited the base, but I steered clear to avoid being taken in for questioning. Coming from the direction of the wrecked Hafsu villages didn't look good on my part, so I ended up looping towards the north to approach Phoenix from that direction. The Phoenix Valley traded with people all over the Sonoran wastes, but word spread surprisingly fast, and I knew the fall of Hafsu would have reached them. Upon reaching the North Road, I began to see more people, and even refugees heading towards Phoenix. In my long 2 weeks away, Phoenix had become even more of a beacon of safety following the Legion's expansion. By midday of the following day, I finally reached the outskirts of Phoenix, which was packed with people going about their business. The head in my pack was just starting to let off a nearly overbearing smell of rot, even under all that wrapping. As I walked down the main road towards the gate, I got the feeling that I was being watched. Being watched wasn't all that surprising considering the cargo I was carrying, but getting closer increased my unease. Walking by the tent hotel where I took Joshua, I walked through a crowd, and a large man wearing a gas mask shoved me out of nowhere. Before I could even shout, "What the hell, man?" he shoved me again into one of the tents where I was at the feet of Bailey, Doc Martin, and Mr. Swilling himself. Mr. Swilling said as I stood to my feet and collected my bearing, "Havasu has fallen to the Legion. Do you know how I know that?" I dusted myself off and replied with certainty despite my nervousness. "Because you have eyes everywhere, I know." Staring at me with a blank expression, he said, "You were gone and unaccounted for almost 3 weeks. You weren't given an independent op, and I demand an explanation." I thought to myself that the jig was up, and I stood there paralyzed for a few seconds. I finally managed to utter, "So you know about my meeting in Legion territory?" They all had a faint look of surprise. It was then that I read the room and realized that they were oblivious to what I said, or very good at pretending. Mr. Swilling's face quickly changed back to its serious state and he said, "Go on." I patted the dust off some more but maintained eye contact with the man. "You know that I met up with an old friend in Scottsdale, right?" None of them acknowledged with any nods or words, so I went on. "I was assisting him with a drug shipment into Scottsdale from the Atomic Stalkers over by the standing gas station off I-17 North. Everybody knows the one. Instead, the raiders never showed, but we still had some samples from the last one." With a sigh, I said, "A Legion recon party considered the gas station up north as their territory, and we were arrested by their unit up there. I got captured, and I spent a while up at Camp Verde for their crime of drug trafficking." Still no change in expressions. I decided to continue on with the lie. Before they could nail me to a cross, I got the slip on them and headed back here. I managed to kill one of them and stole some clothes from a group of prospectors or tribals on the way here. They stared at me blankly for a full minute, and then Doc Martin said sternly, "Check his pack." I frantically worried that they would find the mark of Caesar at the bottom of my pack, but then remembered the other cargo in there. When Bailey opened up the top and saw the blood-soaked wrapping for the head, a ferocious fume of decay from the desert heat emerged. Everyone gagged, and the horrendous fume caught up with all of us as I said, "I figured I would take some proof with me in case you all were suspicious." Bailey carefully picked it up, unwrapped the mess, and observed the head while studying the legionary's left ear. She said, "This guy was definitely Legion, Jack. Got the marks on the left ear and everything." It was then that I noticed the tiny tattoo on the head's left earlobe, and I realized what an idiot I was. How had I not noticed the tiny ear tattoo on every legionary I saw uncovered in the past 2 weeks? I could have just chopped the ear off the guy. Instead, I hauled a whole goddamned head through the desert and blistering heat for over 3 days straight. Bailey placed the head into an empty crate and closed the lid. Everyone continued to fan the fumes away, and Mr. Swilling asked, "What about your friend?" I looked him in the eye and said, "He somehow got his ropes off on the move and ran into the desert, presumably back to Scottsdale. I'm not sure of the details. I was pretty dehydrated by that point." Luckily, all the legionaries from the recon party only had spears and knives, so they couldn't do much when my friend took off. Doc said, "And you were going to be crucified for drug trafficking?" I responded simply with, "Yes." They all stood there for a minute. Mr. Swilling turned his head towards the crate. "You know that we discourage drugs and we battle those who peddle them, right? Even despite Phoenix's stance on the matter?" I wasn't sure of the matter. I had Med X and Psycho on me for most of the time I've been with them. I also saw the different medicinal chems and less powerful recreational ones strapped to Doc Martin's leather vest at that moment. I again wasn't sure what to make of that apparent contradiction, but I responded, "Yes." He asked, "So what made you do it?" I was somewhat relieved that they seemingly believed the story that I was a part-time drug smuggler rather than a drafted Legion agent. I said, "Like I said, I was with an old friend, and he convinced me to do it." Pausing, he looked me over for a moment before saying, "I will let this event be punished by you alone. So don't worry, I won't have your friend harmed. Mr. Kekos' time will come." I was shocked how Mr. Swilling knew the name of the man who walked me away from Bailey and Sykes during that run, and I asked, "You know my friend's name?" He raised his glasses and replied, "Yes, I do. He is the assistant to Mr. Marcus De Niro, the chief ambassador of Scottsdale. Mr. De Niro's position forces him to work very closely with the government of Phoenix, and we are well aware of his personal assistant and right-hand man as well." He paused momentarily before continuing. "Because Scottsdale feels differently towards drugs than we do, we won't jeopardize Phoenix's relationship to them. Although we are still investigating how exactly you know Mr. Kekos and his perspective on the episode with the Legion. We unfortunately did not have eyes on the gas station during your visit to the north. We saw you ride off with someone in a ridiculous suit of metal armor, but his identity is also being investigated after your stay in the Bridgeton Towers, because your story appears to check out, and we currently cannot falsify it. We will take you at your word." I interrupted nervously. "What's going to happen to me?" Mr. Swilling said, 20 lashes back at the Capitol. "Don't worry, we still think you are a good person, but this apparent drug business is going to stop, especially if it is going to make you disappear from your obligations to us without notice. Given your actions with us in the past, you can still take part on missions after the punishment." Looking down, I said, "I accept full responsibility." Mr. Swilling gave a motion for us to all sit down, and he changed his mood instantly by saying, "You know about Havasu, right?" I said, "I wasn't able to keep up with the news in a Legion cell, but you said it was taken." He solemnly said, "Yes, the Legion took it only days ago." I asked plainly, "What does that mean for us?" He said, "It means the West is cut off. The Colorado and the western fringe of Arizona is now under Legion control. This means our mission has changed." Bailey and Doc Martin remained silent and staring at me while I asked, "How so?" He continued, "The Legion is growing out of control, and now there isn't much we can do to stop it, I'm afraid. So, our mission now is to assist in the evacuation of Phoenix." Evacuation, I thought. Shocked by the sudden news, I said, "What about your beloved Phoenix? What about holding it? What about battling the Legion?" Mr. Swilling answered my questions with a speech he obviously rehearsed, likely to address everyone back at the Capitol while I was away. "This city is just a place. Phoenix's heart and soul is the people who live here, and that is what I care about. I will not let these people be massacred or enslaved for no good reason. The people of Phoenix have proven ever since its founding that even the most inhospitable desert cannot tame the spirit of man. Phoenix is not a place but an idea. The people embody the idea that man can conquer Mother Nature and even prosper in the worst places on Earth, and so, we will do it again, and far away from the Legion's shadow." After Havasu fell, there wasn't much standing in the way of Caesar's march on Phoenix. This means there isn't much time before the Legion has the strength it needs to mobilize its forces and kill or enslave everyone here. The people of Phoenix need to leave, and we are going to help. I have spoken to Master Walker and Mayor Sillin, who all agree that we are leaving in a mass exodus. I thought about Caesar and that this evacuation plan was great. For him. If he wants Phoenix annihilated, he's just going to be able to march in and take it with everyone gone. While Mr. Swilling went on with his tirade, I thought even more about what exactly I was doing. I considered the lie I told them and wondered, why did I do that? I should have just been honest with them by saying that I was conscripted by Joshua and forced to fight at Havasu. If they asked how I escaped, I could have just been honest again by saying that Caesar wanted me to spy for him. At least with honesty, I could have pledged my allegiance to the resistance and solidified my stance with them. However, I didn't do that for some reason I couldn't quite figure out. I realized that my casual lie to seemingly save my own hide put me in too deep. Just like Mr. De Niro said on that first meeting with him, like it or not, intentional or not. After my lie, I was Joshua's messenger. Though I liked the resistance and was disgusted by the Legion, I now had to play both sides. As Mr. Swilling concluded his speech, I realized that there was no going back to my shack in the desert at this point. Looking at Mr. Swilling, who finished his speech and was awaiting some kind of response, I said, "Let's get started." Chapter 29. Our New Mission. Our New Mission. Back at the Capitol, everyone was surprised to see me, but troubled when they knew I was going to be punished for drug trafficking. Once again, I was about to be punished for something I didn't do, but I suppose that beat the alternative in true crime. The next day, they tied me to the statue under the rotunda beneath the portrait of Jack Swilling's ancestor, Jack Swilling. Doc Martin was my team leader, so he conducted the whipping. Without my shirt on, I held the statue tight as I felt the long leather whip gash my back 20 times until it stopped. When they untied me, I had a day to recover up in my room where Bailey and the others were still a little suspicious of me. I assisted in supply runs into Phoenix for the next week every day. We mostly gathered food or weapons and ammunition to stock up the Capitol Armory. In town one day, a squatter approached me. This event wasn't unusual, but the beggar who unveiled his hood was. The beggar subtly motioned towards his face, presumably hoping I'd recognize him, but I had no idea who he was. However, his face did look a little too clean for an average squatter, but his clothes seemed fitting for Phoenix. He got up close and said to me while the others were still bartering for goods, "It's me, Mr. Caicos. I was going to speak with you by the Phoenix Gate, but your friends got to you first, and yes, I know my face is different. I got facial reconstruction surgery in Scottsdale when I overheard your friends telling you not to associate with me. Take this letter. It's from Mr. De Niro." As soon as I took the paper, he said, "Now put some caps in my hand and tell me to go away." I gave him a handful of caps and told him to get. He danced down the street all awkwardly, and I slipped the note into my pocket. Bailey and the others approached, and we walked back towards a livelier part of town. We stayed in a saloon to grab a few drinks and some food for a couple of hours just to pass the time before linking up with another contact. When nobody was looking, I peeked at the note which read, "Dear Drifter, on Friday there is going to be a ceremony for all of Phoenix and Scottsdale led by Mayor Sillen. Make sure you are there for it. After the speeches, head backstage. Tell the guards you need to. Join my man in the garden. Don't ask me why I chose that particular phrase, ha ha ha. Anywho, glad you made it out of soldier school or whatever. P.S. You might want to burn this note. Smiley face. Your buddy, Mark D. Winky face, smiley face." He actually drew smiley faces. I put the note in my pocket, and soon enough we headed back to the Capitol. In my room, I lit up a cigarette and burned the note away when I was by myself. The next day, every agent in the Capitol gathered under the rotunda, and Mr. Swilling addressed us. He said that there was going to be some kind of ceremony on Friday for all of Phoenix and Scottsdale. Not even he knew what the event was going to be about. But everyone was supposed to be there for Mayor Sillen's speech before the start of a city-wide fair. As representatives of Phoenix's underground army, we were all obligated to be there. We weren't going to provide security, but we agents were going to monitor the crowds and report anything suspicious. I was just relieved that I didn't have to make an excuse to go there. On Thursday, we were all preparing to go to the ceremony the next day when Doc Martin came into the room and placed some papers on the bed next to me. They were mission dossiers. This was the first time I wasn't given a group assignment that gave me zero clue on the objective. Every mission since I got back from Havasu was just shopping runs, so I was excited to see what I was doing. As Doc said, "You should go over these. They will detail everything we need in order to help evacuate people from the valley and your role in it." Then, he walked out without another word. I was surprised they trusted me enough to run solo, but reading the workload soon clarified. By this point, Doc Martin and Bailey seemed to trust me again, but Sykes and Brutus were still semi-distant. I was involved with my resistance team during 2 giant missions. I earned a lot of respect on the operation to rescue Master Walker, and the Prepper tortured Hanged Man. However, Sykes and Brutus seemed unable to completely buy my explanation for disappearing, and I hoped to make it up to them. Hopefully, the independent ops would land me in my team's good graces, but needless to say, I was glad to be going on my own and away from prying or judgmental eyes. Things were moving fast in the entire civilized valley, and everyone in the resistance had their own objectives regarding Jack's big plan. Going over the papers, they said how many of the teams were going to stay together to eliminate Raider strongholds and mutant encampments along the proposed evacuation routes. There were 2 routes that weren't detailed at all, and simply showed the directions. One was headed east through the Legion frontier of New Mexico, and the other headed southeast past Tucson into Mexico, and landing at the Gulf Coast. In the documents, it was listed that I was one of the agents to seek assistance from numerous groups across the wasteland. Doc Martin, Bailey, and Mr. Swilling knew that my reputation down south was widely known, so my diplomatic role wasn't entirely unexpected. My orders were very vague in resistance style, but outlined the places I had to go and the assistance I needed to request. My orders went as follows. See the reports about suspicious activity around the scrapper town of Gold Canyon, and see what they can offer to the evacuation. Request aid from scavengers, mappers, and robotics techs. Ensure the assistance of the Arizona Rangers at their base in Dust Valley. Annotate their troops, trackers, and first aid equipment. See what they can offer, and our runner will meet them 2 weeks after you make contact. Investigate the Bloomfield Space Center, and mark technology for salvage that can be used in the evacuation. Contact the local Brotherhood of Steel chapter deep in Legion territory and southeast of Flagstaff. Seek their assistance and enlist any support they can offer, whether it be tech or troops. Ensure the cooperation of the U.S. Army at Luke AFB, and see if they are ready for our runner, who will coordinate their forces and detail the logistics of evacuating the people. Inform General McMahon that we need extra troops allocated to secure the evacuation site itself. When I saw the next one, I had a sudden flashback to back home and what I went through as a kid. Investigate the NCR presence at the Yuma runoff. Seek their assistance in distracting the presence of high prepper activity in the southern wastes. I thought about all those years ago when I was just a kid and what the NCR did to my family. By this time, the NCR owned all of California and even parts of Nevada. I never once thought that they would establish themselves across the Colorado and rake their claws into Arizona. I crossed the Colorado years ago to get away from them. Those people hired mercenaries to butcher my family, and their citizens, whether in cities or on the frontier, treated me like absolute crap everywhere I went. I sat there thinking angrily about the NCR, but with brief moments of consideration on the road I would take to secure those factions. While thinking about my past, my hardships, and all my new responsibilities, I wondered how exactly I was supposed to keep in touch with Kaisar, the Legatus, or even Mr. De Niro while I was out doing all that. Hopefully, the big ceremony in Phoenix would somehow fill me in on what Caesar required. But the silence from that man and even Joshua was unsettling. Chapter 30, The Guest Speaker. Since Mr. Swilling told everyone in the capital about the ceremony, he sent several runners into Phoenix to haul back enough radiation suits from the butcher shop for everyone to all head to Phoenix at once. However, 3 agents were selected to stay behind and make sure no wasteland beasts decided to make the capital their home while we were gone. So about 25 of us donned in rad suits and headed toward Phoenix. All of us changed back into our normal clothes in the butcher shop. Luckily, almost all of Phoenix was gathered in the town square, which aided in our discretion. We walked through the desolate streets, hearing the commotion in the center of town. Upon arrival in the city center, the whole thing was quite a spectacle. All of Phoenix was condensed into this small section of the city where people traded, and shopkeepers sold food or whatever else to the residents and passing caravanners. In the center of the stage and connected to the ruined skyscraper that housed the government of Phoenix, stood all the city officials. Amongst the crowds were even some Scottsdale residents accompanied by servants and looked disgusted at the filth of Phoenix. The agents dispersed into the crowds with designations on when to head back to the capital and avoid the post-ceremony traffic. I approached the side of the crowd relatively close to the backstage entrance, where a few Scottsdale guards stood to ward off curious citizens. Atop the stage, I saw Mayor Sillin sitting in the center by a microphone, and to his right were the Phoenix Council and Master Walker. To the mayor's left was Mark De Niro and a ghoul man dressed in a full pre-war military uniform. The ghoul must have been General McMahon, who was the commander of the army at Luke AFB. Also on the stage were a few other people who looked to be some of Scottsdale's elite. Everyone in the crowd chattered, and I looked around making sure I wasn't near any of my fellow agents. Mayor Sillin stood up and approached the microphone. Everyone cheered, and he motioned for the crowd to settle down. There, the elected governor of Squatter Town, Phoenix, spoke. People of Phoenix, I would first like to thank Mr. Marcus De Niro, the chief ambassador of Scottsdale, for joining me today on this stage for a grand event in our city's history. I would also like to thank General McMahon for his attendance and his assistance in ensuring people from all over the wastes have a safe route into our metropolitan oasis. You have been our greatest ally for over 2 decades, and I know what you and your soldiers do is not an easy task. Motioning towards Master Walker, Mayor Sillin continued, We, the people of Phoenix, also want to give your Army of Glory our sincerest thanks for saving our very own Master Walker from the murderous preppers and raiders that litter the surrounding valley. It would not have been possible without you. The downtrodden masses of Phoenix let loose a loud applause as Mayor Sillin continued. So this is a wonderful day for a fair and a great announcement from our neighbor most prosperous Scottsdale. While we still have to remain vigilant against the wasteland monsters and those who would wish to harm us, you, the people of Phoenix, in your day-to-day survival, make this city an oasis of safety in the ever-so-hostile desert. Everyone clapped again, and the mayor concluded his brief introduction. I will now give the microphone over to our guest speaker, the illustrious ambassador, Marcus De Niro of Scottsdale. Standing up, Mark shook the mayor's hand and looked out over the crowd holding the microphone. He started, "People of Phoenix, I am standing before you today as the premier representative of Scottsdale to announce our two cities." There was a long pause before the young socialite shouted into the mic, "Unification." The Phoenix crowd stayed silent in disbelief, processing what the flashy man who most of them never even heard of had just said. Suddenly, the predominantly Phoenix crowd of thousands cheered as loud as can be, but I noticed the people of Scottsdale didn't look very enthused. The young Mr. De Niro went on through the applause and cheers. "Our cities have been allies for so long, and it is with great pleasure that I announce our two communities becoming one for the first time since the walls of Scottsdale were made. We, the people of the civilized valley, must unite our strength and prosperity in the face of that menace to the north calling themselves the Legion. Yes, our two cities will unite in a stand to show the Legion that they are about to mess with the wrong people." The crowd went wild, and he continued speaking through the roar. "With the unification of Scottsdale and Phoenix, and of course with our beloved allies in the Army of Glory, we will shatter the Legion as they try to take our homes away from us. You all may have heard rumor about a withdrawal and relocation of our people, but with Mayor Sillin, Master Walker, and the Grand Councils of Phoenix and Scottsdale uniting, we have decided to hold our city, our one city. Who's with us?" Everyone went wilder than I thought possible. Some in the sea of Phoenix wasters even started mindlessly brawling with one another in joyful anarchy. With cheering, deafening applause, and a violently hyped crowd, Mr. De Niro continued whipping them into a frenzy by shouting, "Why should we let some reject calling himself Kaiser take away our home? Our united home. Who of you is ready to stand and fight for what is ours?" The entire crowd went absolutely crazy in cheer once again, and the crowd was a violent mess of clapping, shouting, and random fist-fighting. Even the Scottsdale people in the crowd clapped in semi-approval, while still looking at the Phoenix residents in disgust behind the safety of their bodyguards. The speech went on for a few more minutes when the crowd died down. Mayor Sillin took the stage at the end, basically explained free trade between the United Cities, and went over the agreed-upon dress code for those who wished to enter the district of Scottsdale. This was in order to keep Scottsdale nice, and the less desirable squatters out. I couldn't understand it, though. It became obvious that Mr. De Niro was behind the unification, but I couldn't understand why he would encourage the entire city to make a stand against the Legion. It seemed like the resistance was playing right into Caesar's wishes by just giving him the city. With that plan, I suppose both factions would have gotten what they wanted at minimal cost. Now, if Caesar wanted to destroy the city, he would have to throw everything he had against a united metropolis of thousands who wanted to keep their homes. Not even mentioning the U.S. Army, who is offering all of their forces in defense of Phoenix. As the crowd dispersed, many were pumped, and I overheard countless conversations of people saying they couldn't wait to take on the Legion. Why on earth did Mr. De Niro do this? I remembered the note I was given days ago and knew I could get the answers I wanted from the man himself.